Hello, and welcome to the first episode of the series that I am tentatively calling Faith as Becoming. A series where I am going to try to reconstruct Christian theology from first principle using rigorous logical reasoning. I know that doesn't sound hubristic at all. This first episode will be called Why is Reality Comprehensible? And we'll see where it leads. But first, some background about the series as a whole. Who am I? I am a teacher from Sweden. You can probably hear a bit of an accent. The funny thing about accents is you never hear your own. So if you claim that I have an accent, I will probably say that I don't, while simultaneously knowing that I do. I used to be a believer in Christianity and God. But I lost my faith during my teenage years. I can't really say why or when, but it happened. I have always liked the idea of believing, the idea of a God, but I can't say that I have really been a believer during my adult years. I have spent years thinking about it, about spirituality, about theology, and about God. And I have pretty much landed in I think I believe territory, not certain, but approaching conviction. And this video series or audio podcast series, however I choose to put it out there, and however you choose to listen to it, is pretty much detailing my reasoning and my journey, I suppose. I guess I should tell you up front what this series is and what it isn't. This is not me trying to prove Christianity with mathematical certainty. I'm also not claiming revolutionary insights. Pretty much everything I state here has, while it has been reasoned out by me, other people have reasoned it out long before me, so I'm pretty much walking in their footsteps. I'm also not saying that this is the only path to faith or even the best one. I'm saying it's mine. I'm showing you the intellectual journey that I took, starting from doubt, from I don't know if any of this is true, and reasoning my way to something that looks remarkably like classical Christian theology. Along the way, I arrived independently at conclusions that align pretty well with thinkers like Thomas Aquinas, Augustine, even Origen, which suggests to me that maybe rigorous reasoning really does lead somewhere, and that there is a reason that these conclusions have been reached by others before me. So this series is not claiming proof, not claiming that this is the only path, and certainly not claiming superiority over any other approaches, and not claiming certainty. It is going to be long form, though. Maybe 45 to 60 minutes per episodes. If you have ever watched long form content and thought, oh, I wish someone did that for Christian theology, well, you found the right place. Systematic and rigorous is the aim. And if that's not your thing, that's totally fine. But if you want to take the time together with me to think about these questions, I think you'll find something of interest here. Now then, what it is. Honest intellectual journey, discovering things together. That's the goal. Some rigorous logical argumentation. Christian theology derived from first principles, and something that is long, detailed, and systematic. Now, another thing I need to make clear from the outset. I'm coming at this from a very intellectual angle. Not to say that other approaches are stupid, but what I mean is I can't speak to mystical experiences because I never had any. I can't really speak to emotional encounters with the divine either. My path has been through thinking and through reasoning about these issues. And I fully acknowledge that the grandmother praying to her rosary with just simple trust that God listens might be closer to God than I am with all of my systematic frameworks. Faith, I suppose, takes many forms, and you can arrive at these things through many paths. The only thing I can say is that this is my path. This is the path that I walked. So, the immediate journey ahead. Season 1, The Logical Chain. I'm planning about 13 episodes, but we'll see. From observation of what we can be certain about and how that leads us to Christian theology, step by step, with each episode building on the last. All right, let's begin. Why is reality comprehensible at all? Now, this is pretty much the question that started everything for me. And it might seem like a strange place to start a series on Christian theology. Why not start with, does God exist, or is the Bible true? But I think that this question is much more fundamental than that. And as we'll see, it will lead us somewhere quite unexpected. It's an excellent way to start. But what do I mean by comprehensible? Well, we can do physics. We can discover mathematical laws that describe how reality works. F equals ma, E equals mc squared, the inverse square law of gravity, quantum mechanics. Well, quantum mechanics, we understand it well enough, at least, despite the strangeness it operates according to precise mathematical equations that we can calculate and make predictions. We can follow logical reasoning and arrive at truth. We can make predictions about reality and we test them, and we can understand things. That's not trivial. And I think we take it for granted, but when you think about it, it's actually deeply strange. Einstein himself said that the eternal mystery of the world is its comprehensibility. Why should reality be structured in ways that our minds can grasp? Why should mathematical equations describe physical laws? Why should reason reveal truth about the world? Let me give you some examples to make this a bit more concrete. So, Newton, according to the story at least, sees an apple falling on the ground and draws the conclusion that what pulled the apple to the ground is the same force that makes the moon orbit around the Earth. He discovers that gravity works the same on Earth as it does in space. Using this, we can then predict planetary orbits centuries in advance. We can understand quantum mechanics, a phenomenon that we never evolved to encounter. We can use logic and it works. A implies B, B implies C, therefore A implies C. And mathematics invented for pure theory turns out to describe reality. It might take decades or even centuries for us to find applications for the mathematics, but we do. It's happened several times, and I'll give you some examples later. This is the foundation that we're building on. Not I had a religious experience or the Bible says so, though, as I said before, those might be valid for others. No, we're starting with something anyone doing science must acknowledge. Reality is intelligible. The universe makes sense, and we can understand it. Now, you might say, so what? Of course, reality is comprehensible. We live in it. We evolved to understand it, and we'll get to that objection. But first, let me show you why this question matters for theology. If we can explain why reality is comprehensible, if we can give a good reason for it rather than just accepting it as a brute fact, that explanation is going to tell us something very fundamental about the nature of reality itself. And, as we'll see throughout this series, the best explanation at every single point points us towards something very specific. And we'll get there, but not quite yet. First, we will look at some possible explanations for why the universe is comprehensible. Now, 3 possible explanations for why the universe is comprehensible are as follows. 1, pure coincidence. 2, an evolutionary explanation. And number 3, reality is grounded in logos. Let's work through these carefully, one at a time. And let's start with number one. Pure coincidence. Maybe reality just happens to be ordered in ways that match our cognitive structures. It's lucky. Cosmic accident. There is no deeper reason. It's just how things are. Now, this strains credibility. And here's the problem. The match between our minds and reality isn't vague or approximate. It is extraordinarily precise. Consider this. As I mentioned before, we can describe the motion of planets using equations, not just planets move in roughly circular paths, but exact elliptical orbits calculated to extreme precision. We can predict where Jupiter will be in the year 2525 down to the second, and we have been able to make these calculations for a long time, long before we had the advanced computers that we have today. We can describe the behavior of subatomic particles that would never directly observed using mathematics. We can predict the mass of the Higgs boson before discovering it. The standard model of particle physics involves enormously complex mathematics, group theory, quantum field theory, that was developed for abstract mathematical beauty, and later turned out to perfectly describe reality at scales we never evolved to understand. Now, if this is coincidence, it's just not one lucky break. It is physical laws being mathematical, logic working consistently. Our mathematics invented for pure theory, describing physical reality, predictions working across all scales from quantum through our everyday lives up into the cosmic, those same laws working everywhere in the universe, and the laws being elegant and simple rather than arbitrary and complex. Now, if those are coincidences, that's a lot of coincidences to stack on top of each other. This gets us to the anthropic objection. The anthropic objection is, of course, we observe a comprehensible universe. If it wasn't comprehensible, we wouldn't be here to observe it. This doesn't really answer the question, though, does it? It explains why we observe a universe, maybe. It doesn't explain why the universe we observe is structured by elegant mathematical laws rather than arbitrary chaos with just enough stability for life. You can, if you work on it, imagine a universe with just enough order for chemistry and biology, but no deeper mathematical structure. Would still exist, in some form. We just couldn't do physics. So, is it possible that all of this is coincidence? Yes, it's possible. But it strains credibility. It requires accepting a massive stack of extremely unfortunate accidents with no explanation for why they should occur. And I think that we can do better. And explanation number 2, the evolutionary explanation, is doing better. It's a more sophisticated answer. We evolved to understand our environment. Our cognitive structures match reality because natural selection shaped them to. Minds that accurately modeled reality survived. Minds that didn't. They disappeared. This is more compelling than pure coincidence, and for some domains it is clearly true. Evolution definitely explains our basic cognitive abilities. Recognizing faces. We have always existed in groups. We need to recognize the other individuals within those groups. Judging distances. We need to know how far away the gazelle is in order to kill it. Understanding cause and effect. If I kick this rock, it will hurt me. Basic physics intuitions, objects fall, momentum transfers. If I push this rock down the cliff, it will fall down. If I throw this spear at the gazelle, it will hit the gazelle and kill it. Pattern recognition. A rustle in the grass might possibly mean that a predator is nearby and I should act accordingly. And social reasoning. If I act in this certain way, I will not be accepted by the group. Thus, I act in a different way. These are survival relevant skills. Of course we evolved them. But here's the problem. Evolution explains our ability to understand the things we evolved to encounter. It doesn't explain our ability to understand things that we never encountered on the savannas of Africa. For example, evolution can't explain why we can do quantum mechanics. It can't explain why we can understand relativity, or the Big Bang, black holes. subatomic particles, massive cosmological structures, abstract mathematics, or non-Euclidean geometry. Our ancestors never encountered quantum superposition. They never needed to understand space-time curvature. They never saw a quark. Natural selection didn't select for the ability to understand these things because they weren't part of the environment of evolutionary adaptation. But we can understand them. By working together, we can reason these things out, and we can form frameworks that allows us to understand these things. Not just vaguely, but precisely, using mathematics, making predictions, and testing them. How? If evolution shaped our minds to understand survival-relevant features of our immediate environment, which is medium-sized objects moving at medium speeds, why can we understand the very small, the very large, the very fast, and the very old? The deepest puzzle here is mathematics itself. Mathematics is abstract. Pure mathematics is developed with no reference to physical reality at all. Mathematicians just explore what's logically consistent. Things like group theory, topology, complex analysis, these were developed as pure intellectual exercises. And then, as I said before, decades or centuries later, they turn out to perfectly describe physical reality. For example, non-Euclidean geometry led us to general relativity. Matrix mechanics led us to quantum theory. From group theory came particle physics, and number theory led into cryptography and quantum computing. Eugene Wigner calls this the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics in the natural sciences. Unreasonable, because there is no evolutionary explanation for why abstract mathematics invented for beauty should describe physics. Evolution might explain why we have some reasoning ability, but the scope differs. It doesn't explain why reality is mathematical at all. It doesn't explain why abstract math describes physical law, why we can understand things far outside our evolutionary environment, why logic is universal rather than domain-specific, or why the laws are simple and elegant. So, the verdict: does evolution explain why reality is comprehensible? Partially. It explains survival-level comprehension, but it doesn't explain the deep comprehensibility, the mathematical structure, the universality of logic, our ability to grasp the quantum and the cosmic. There must be something else going on, which leads us into the third explanation: logos. Reality is comprehensible because reality is grounded in logos, in reason itself, in divine mind, in rational order as the fundamental nature of existence. Let me unpack what this means, starting with what is logos. Logos is a Greek term, meaning reason, rational principle, order, divine reason, and the organizing structure of reality. John chapter 1 verse 1, in the beginning was the logos. It's often translated as the word these days, but logos is the original Greek term, and it means mind. But you don't need to accept Christian revelation to work with this concept. Greek philosophers, long before Christianity entered the scene, like Heraclitus and the Stoics, used the term logos to describe the rational principle pervading reality. So, if reality is grounded in logos, if reason is fundamental rather than emergent, then several things follow. Reality must be structured rationally, because logos is rational. Reality must be comprehensible, because logos is intelligible. Mathematics describes reality, because logos is mathematical. Logic works, because logos is logical. And we can understand reality, because our reason itself participates in logos. This isn't circular. I'm not assuming what I'm trying to prove. I'm saying if the ground of reality is reason itself, then we should expect exactly what we observe. We observe these things that I explained before, and fitting logos in there fits perfectly. And here's the elegant part. If reality is structured by divine reason, and our minds are rational, then comprehension of the universe is mind meeting mind. Scientific investigation isn't just lucky pattern matching, it's literally studying the rational structure that was willed into existence by logos. Physics traces the order established by divine reason. Mathematics discovers the patterns inherent in divine thought, the language, while logic follows the structure of logos itself. Now, this explains the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics immediately. Mathematics isn't a human invention that mysteriously describes reality. Mathematics is the structure of logos that our minds partially grasp. When we do pure mathematics, we're discovering aspects of divine reason. When that mathematics turns out to describe physics, of course it does. Physics is the expression of that same logos in material reality. Now let me strengthen this argument with a point that will develop more in episode 2, the potentiality argument. Even if the universe emerged from nothing, quantum vacuum, whatever, that nothing must have at the very least contained potentiality, the potential for something to exist, the potential for laws, for structure to emerge, for something rather than nothing. But potentiality itself is something. It's not pure non-existence. And if that potentiality contained the capacity for order, for laws, for mathematical structure, then order itself is fundamental, not emergent. Think about it. For order to emerge from chaos, you need rules governing how chaos can become order, a process by which emergence happens, and stability once order appears. But those are order. The very mechanism by which order could emerge requires order to already exist. So order can't be emergent from pure chaos. Order must be fundamental. Therefore, logos. If order is fundamental, if structure is built into the ground of reality itself, if even the potentiality before the universe contained rational principles, then the ground of reality is logos. Not mindless mechanism, not random chance, but reason itself. Now, let's compare our three explanations. The coincidence argument explains nothing, really, and the problems with it are that there are too many lucky breaks and there is no mechanism for anything. Evolution. Much better. Explains survival level comprehension, but it can't explain deep math. It can't explain quantum understanding or the universality of the universe, the laws that we observe. Now, the logos argument explains all comprehension. It explains why math works. It explains why logic is universal and why the laws of the universe are elegant. The problem, it requires accepting that reason is fundamental. Now, if we apply Occam's razor to this, we get the following. Occam's razor is an argument that says that the simplest explanation that accounts for the observations you observe is usually the correct one. And in this case, logos is the simplest explanation that accounts for all of the observation. Basic comprehension, evolution gets this one too. The mathematical structure of physical law, abstract math describing reality, logic working universally, our ability to understand both the quantum and the cosmic scales, and the elegance and the simplicity of the governing laws. Occam's razor, logos, is fundamental to this. Now, Occam's razor isn't proof. Not at all. But I remind you again, I am not claiming proof. I am following a chain of reasoning here, and some things must be taken on faith. I'm just describing what is most reasonable to me. Now, the implications of this, if logos is fundamental, what follows? All right, so if you accept, even tentatively, just entertaining the thought that logos is the best explanation for why reality is comprehensible, several quite important implications follow immediately. Let's walk through them together. Implication number one is that science and faith are perfectly compatible. Science is a way to study divine reason. If natural law is the expression of logos, then scientific investigation is quite literally studying the rational structure that God willed into existence. This isn't in conflict with faith, quite the opposite. It is exploring different aspects of the same logos. Medieval theologians talked about this. They called it God's two books. We have the book of Scripture, which is the Bible, special revelation, God speaking to humans, and the book of nature, which is general revelation, the rational structure of God. Both reveal God, but differently. Scripture talks about God's relationship with us, whereas nature shows us God's rational structure, the rational structure of creation itself. And this explains something quite historical. Many founders of modern science were deeply religious, and maybe that's not a coincidence. People like Newton, Kepler, Maxwell, Faraday, Mendel, Lemaitre, they all saw scientific investigation as literally thinking God's thoughts after him. Understanding creation was a form of worship. They weren't doing science despite being religious. Their theology motivated their science. Their science was a way to get closer to God. And here's something crucial. Modern scientific discoveries strengthened this argument rather than weakening it. We now know that the universe had a beginning, a Big Bang. I know that the time thing doesn't really work with modern physics there, but I'll get to that in a later episode. We also know that even quantum vacuum has structure and laws. Physical constants are fine-tuned to extraordinary precision. We know that reality operates on exact mathematical principles, and we know that DNA itself contains coded information. None of these things were known to, say, Thomas Aquinas. He argued for God based on much less than that. If he had known what we now know about how precisely ordered reality is, how mathematically elegant the laws are, how information itself is fundamental to life, his faith would have been stronger for it, as would his arguments, not weaker. There is no inherent conflict between faith and science. They're exploring the same logos from different angles. Science asks, how does reality work? Theology asks, why does reality exist and what does it mean? These are two different questions, but very compatible inquiries. Implication number two is that this points towards a creator. We move from a logos to God. If reality is grounded in logos, in reason, in rational order, what does that tell us about the ground of reality itself? It tells us that the ground is rational, intelligent, even mind-like. Not a mindless mechanism that spat out a universe, not a brute fact, but something that thinks, that wills, that orders, something that has intent. I need to remind you once again here, just to be clear, I am not claiming this proves God exists. I think trying to prove the existence of God is approaching the entire thing from the wrong angle. But I am claiming that it points toward God as the best explanation. If you're trying to explain why reality is comprehensible, the answer, it's grounded in divine reason, is more explanatory than it just is, or we evolved to think so. So the change so far. Reality is comprehensible. That's an observation. The best explanation for this is that reality is grounded in logos. Logos implies rational ground. Rational ground pretty much equals mind. Therefore, reality is grounded in rational divine mind. We'll develop this much more in episode 2 when we talk about potentiality requiring actuality, but the foundation is already there. The very possibility of doing science points towards God. Implication number 3 is that reason can lead us to God. If reality is grounded in logos and our reason participates in that logos, then reason can lead towards God. Not with certainty, not with proof. I mentioned earlier that I think that's approaching it from the entirely wrong angle, but with genuine insight. And this is what we're doing in this series. We're starting from observation, observing the fact that reality is comprehensible. We're following reason wherever it leads, and building these arguments step by step, arriving at conclusions that look remarkably like classical theology. Not because I started with these conclusions and worked backward, but because reasoning led me here. Now, let's talk about St. Augustine and Thomas Aquinas for a little while. Augustine said that I believe in order to understand. And Aquinas talked about faith seeking understanding. Both of these people started inside the faith and used reason to develop their faith. I'm doing the same thing, but from the completely other direction. I start with observing and thinking, and because of this, I'm starting to believe. Understanding seeking faith, not faith seeking understanding. But we're using the same tools: rigorous logic, systematic thinking, and careful argument, and a bit of scholasticism thrown in there. And I want to say again, this intellectual path isn't superior to other paths. The grandmother praying to her rosary with simple trust might have a purer, deeper, and more complete faith than mine. The person who encounters God through suffering or beauty or sudden conviction, I have no arguments there. This is just the path that I have walked. The path of reasoning carefully about hard questions. Maybe that says a lot about how I function, how my brain functions, but that's what I have done, and I am showing you where it has led me. Now, to close out the episode, I'm going to get ahead of some of you, if indeed anyone is even listening at this point, and address some objections that I foresee. Objection number 1. This is circular. You're assuming what you're trying to prove. And I will say no to that. I'm not starting with God exists, therefore reality is comprehensible. I'm starting with the observation that reality is comprehensible. This is undeniable. We do science. We can predict plenty of things in the universe. And then asking, what is the best explanation for this? And trying to show that logos is more explanatory than other forms of interpretations. That's not circular, that's inference to best explanation. Objection number 2. You can't prove any of this. Correct. I can't prove this with mathematical certainty or any form of certainty. I'm not trying to. I'm showing that if you accept reality requires explanation, and if you follow where reason leads, logos emerges as the best explanation. Could I be wrong? Of course. Could reality just be a brute fact? Possibly, something that popped into existence with no intentionality behind it. Maybe. But logos as ground is, at least to me, more explanatory than brute fact or lucky evolution. Objection 3. Why can't it just be how things are, no reasoning behind it? It can be. You're allowed to say reality is comprehensible, and that's just how it is, no further explanation. But to me, that's very intellectually unsatisfying. We don't accept just how it is for any other phenomena. We ask why and we seek explanation. So why should we accept it here? And if we're going to explain it, logos is the most complete explanation available. Objection number 4. This doesn't get you to Christianity specifically. Absolutely correct. Thus far. This episode establishes logos as the ground of reality. It doesn't get you to Trinity, incarnation, and Jesus Christ. That's what the rest of the series is for. We're building step by step. This episode 1 has established the foundation. The Christian specifics come later, but they'll build on this foundation, and they will lead us somewhere very interesting. So, let's summarize what we have here. We have established that reality is comprehensible. We can do science, math describes physical law, and logic works. This requires explanation. Why is this so? We have identified 3 possibilities for this: coincidence, evolution, and logos. I have claimed and explained why I think that logos is the best explanation for this. It accounts for all of the observations, all of the things that we see. Therefore, reality is grounded in divine reason. Now, where this leads. If reality is grounded in logos, several questions immediately follow. What is this logos? What are its characteristics? How did reality come from logos? If logos is fundamental, does that mean God exists? And what kind of God would this be? We'll get there. In episode 2, we're going to develop the cosmological argument. Specifically, even the nothing before the universe, before space and time itself, must have at least contained potentiality. And potentiality cannot actualize itself. This will establish that pure being, fully actualized, no potentiality, must exist as the necessary ground of reality, and will show that this pure being must be logos. So, the chain that we're building here. This episode 1 talked about reality being grounded in logos. Episode 2, pure being exists and is logos. Episode 3 will discuss pure being outside of time. Episode 4 will talk about how God wanted us, humans, specifically. Episode 5 will discuss the fact that God must be love. And in episode 6, I will discuss why I feel that the Trinity is necessary. Still building from the simple argument that we can observe and measure the universe. And eventually, I will discuss the fact that the incarnation, that is Jesus Christ, also was necessary. We're building systematically, and each episode sets up the next. Now, homework, fun, right? If you're engaging with this series seriously, here's what I suggest. Think about the intelligibility question yourself. Look around at reality and ask yourself, why can I understand this? Read some physics. Read about some mathematics if you're not used to it. Follow a logical proof. Then ask, why does this work? And then ask yourself, answer with it does. Is that really satisfying? Or does logos as ground make more sense? I'm genuinely interested in objections, questions, and alternative views about this. This is a conversation. It's not supposed to be a lecture. If you think I have made an error in reasoning, tell me about it. And if you have a better explanation, I really want to hear it. The comments are open. Let's think about this together. And if people get involved, I am more than happy to engage and make intermittent episodes where I discuss these things even more. Now, the final thought before we end this. If you're watching this, you're probably someone who thinks carefully about these kinds of questions in a similar vein that I do. And hopefully you value intellectual honesty. And you probably aren't really satisfied with easy answers that appeal to authority, which is good. Neither am I. That's not what I'm offering. I'm not an authority on any of this. But what I am offering you is a careful, rigorous, step-by-step argument from observation to Christian theology. It might be wrong. I might have made errors, but it's honest. I can promise you that. And it's systematic. And at the very least, I think it's worth thinking about. So, thank you for watching or listening, however you've approached this. If you're still here, I'm kind of impressed. Episode 2 will tackle the cosmological argument and establish that pure being exists. and discuss potentiality and actuality. I will hopefully see you then. Bye.